let's take a moment to talk about the intros of Zelda games. The adventures present in the Legend of Zelda series are known to be quite legendary. It's even in the name itself. Every game has its own share of unique landscapes to traverse, adept challenges in the form of combats and puzzle solving, and some of them even have some really great stories that are strengthened by the vast lore of the series. But what good is a solid adventure without a great way to introduce all these things off and get a player really engaged in the experience? Well, oddly enough, this subject tends to be a bit of a moral gray area for the series, because while some of these intros are known to be quite outstanding in iconic sections of the game, some of them are Twilight Princess, or at least on that scale, where they treat the player like they've never touched a video game before, and present information in the most menial ways possible. I'm not saying that they're unplayable or anything, besides the stupid goat minigame that you have to play twice, but some of them definitely undercut the fantastic adventures that lie up ahead, for many different reasons. So that's why for today, I thought I would break down each of the 3D Zelda intros on a more analytical perspective to understand what all worked and what didn't, and ultimately provide the answer on what makes a good Zelda intro. It's not all negative though, trust me, as there were a lot of elements about almost all of them that I still liked. But instead of doing this one all alone, I thought I would get my good pal and fellow Zelda enthusiast MaskedNintendoBandit on the scene, to provide some more perspective and thoughts on this quite vast subject. But with that said, enough of this intro, let's now start by talking about the intros of the Zelda series.
So, when it comes down to designing a good intro for a game, there are 3 important elements to it that should all be checked off. 1. Teaching the player the general mechanics and controls. 2. Having them understand the general gameplay structure or loop that will be present in the adventure. And 3. Setting up the story and giving purpose to the actions that you are doing. Depending on how well these elements are included and introduced to the player, that really determines how interesting and engaging a game's intro will be. And one fantastic example of all of these elements being executed well is the intro to Ocarina of Time. The game starts off with a brief yet mysterious story exposition that really engages the player, before throwing them out into the Kokiri Forest, where they have to find themselves a sword and a shield to progress. There's no real scripted tutorial or quest on how to do this, as the openness of this area builds desire to freely explore and seek out its quirky inhabitants to learn more. Then, once completed, they are given more interesting info on this game's story before entering the first dungeon, which introduces the player to a lot of the important gameplay mechanics like combat and puzzle solving, and you even take down your first creepy boss. And finally, the intro ends off with the complete piece to the story arc you've been learning so far, and throws a now trained young hero into the vast world of Hyrule to really begin your adventure. Each of the 3 elements we talked about earlier are extremely present within this intro, as it puts a lot of information on the table while still leaving the player wanting more and eager to start their quest. Exploring the forest and speaking to everyone got players used to the heavy interactive element that this game relies on. All of the combat and puzzle solving was interesting and served as a good foundation for future challenges to come. And it was all, genuinely, a lot of good fun. Heck, the first steps a player takes into the sprawling Hyrule field after completing the section is well known to be one of the most iconic moments in the series, and that's because the introduction did such a great job on hyping it all up and engaging the player to really begin their long adventure.
However, despite this game setting the tone for many great intros to come, future installments would start to lack originality when developing them, as they eventually start feeling a lot more scripted and repetitive. In The Wind Waker, you start off as an ordinary kid who leads a simple life, occasionally doing menial tasks around the town, solves an inconvenient issue that arises, and as soon as things return to normal, a huge random event takes place that kickstarts your adventure. Now, by itself, there's nothing wrong with the way this intro is laid out from a storyboard perspective, but there is something wrong when this exact structure is copied and pasted across many future Zelda games to come. In Twilight Princess, you also start off as an ordinary kid who leads a simple life, occasionally doing menial tasks around the town, solves an inconvenient issue that arises, and as soon as things return to normal, a huge random event takes place that kickstarts your adventure. And again, in Skyward Sword, you start off as an ordinary kid who leads a simple life, doing menial tasks around the town.
Okay, I think they get the idea.
Right, my bad. It's not that this is a bad structure in any way, it's just that it's unfortunate to see a series as diverse as Zelda undergo such repetition in their intros. Although we really can't blame Wind Waker for setting this trend as it was technically unique for its time, it still definitely felt weaker than what came before it. Sure, this intro was interesting on a story perspective by setting up the background about the hero of time and how this story gets intertwined with the pirate gang that crashes your island. But there was no interesting challenge on a gameplay level that pushed the player to get better. I definitely liked Outside Island as a location and the bit of interactive freedom it provided, but the main events of the intro were just menial tasks that were basically a matter of point-to-point travel that provided practically nothing to the actual gameplay. This in turn made the intro feel more like a story-driven tutorial rather than the actual part of the gameplay, which is a very safe way to structure a game's intro, but definitely couldn't compare to the vast diversity of what its predecessor had.
Moving on from Wind Waker though, you would think that the developers would try to improve from it to create a much more compelling and original intro, but instead they created the Twilight Princess intro. Same formula, but double the amount of tutorials and triple the length for no apparent reason. Like seriously, this intro quite literally never ends, as it's basically pointless farm hand simulator for like an hour straight, until the game just randomly throws the story at you and you move on to the next section. There's no real purpose to your actions other than to menially teach the player the controls, I guess, and even when it finally moves on to the next section of the game, the adventure still doesn't have its footing just yet, as it literally takes hours into Twilight Princess for the really solid gameplay and structure to be introduced. I guess the one positive takeaway from this intro is that it does have that one mini adventure section, you know, where it actually feels like you're playing the game for a little bit by exploring the forest and battling enemies. That was pretty fun, especially considering that it set up a future part in the game by making you go through the area in a different state. But other than that, there really wasn't much going on for it, and overall the intro was fairly weak.
Now, the final of the three games, Skyward Sword, still had a lot of the tedium that was present in the last two, and it even takes a while to gain its footing. But the one thing that really made up for it that I appreciate immensely was the story. Now, Skyward Sword is a very important game in the Zelda timeline, literally being the first one and all, so I appreciate how its intro really took the time to develop its characters and themes that would be extremely important to the rest of the game. Even that opening cinematic with the loft wings and Zelda singing and everything really set the mood, so it definitely had a lot of good feel-good elements. But ultimately, it did fall short on the same Zelda intro cliche of the past games, and the gameplay itself was a matter of running from point to point. But at least the send-off to start your quest by descending beneath the clouds was a really great way to kick off the amazing adventure that is soon to follow.
With all of these intros in mind, it's clear to see why these had nowhere near the impact of Ocarina of Time's intro. Because while the other three intros felt more like blanket tutorials that must be cleared in order to get to the actual main gameplay, Ocarina of Time's intro was so encapsulating that it actually felt like an important part of the game itself. And hopefully going over the last three games' intro helped prove that. But what about one intro that we skipped over? Majora's Mask. This one really stands on its own compared to the others, as its main purpose is to teach the player of the 3-day cycle that is unique to this specific adventure. The need to teach things like basic controls, combat, and puzzle solving is thrown out of the window considering it's a sequel to a game that already did all of those things. Instead, all of the energy is devoted to letting the player understand the scheduling of all of the events that happen in this town across the 3-day cycle, which it does accomplish, but in a somewhat cryptic manner. You see, your main goal before the days are up is to find a moon's tear so you can enter the clock tower, but the events to do so consist of finding a random stray fairy in town, finding the exact location of where to use it, then popping this one random balloon, and so on, which are all events that don't even correlate to what you think you should be doing. Clocktown is a very big town, and a lot of the events in this intro consist of being in the right place at the right time. Accomplishing this can be hard with the lack of guidance, and the openness of the town mixed with the game's time limit makes it so that many important things will be missed, even including the tutorial for the inverted Song of Time, which is crucial to finish this game. At least this intro felt interesting and unique to others though, but having more cohesion behind the events that you're doing and at least nudging the player in the right direction more would have improved upon it significantly.
As you can probably see, creating a perfect intro for a game is no easy task, and there's a lot that needs to be done in order to make it both captivating, unique, and helpful. Remember back to this list we made for the 3 most important things an intro must have? Well, just about all of them are present across the 5 games, but it's the execution on these ideas that are more or less lackluster for some. Twilight Princess put a ton of effort in teaching the player the controls and mechanics, but took forever doing so and was extremely tedious. Majoras Mask put a lot of effort in teaching the player the importance of the 3-day cycle, but went about it far too vaguely. And Skyward Sword put a lot of thought into developing its story and characters early on, but had no strong gameplay to support it. Now, it's not that I think that any of these intros were terrible or that they ruined the experience or anything. I just thought that they were lackluster ways to start off such incredible adventures, and none of them could ever live up to the grand success of what was presented in Ocarina of Time. That is, until the most recent one. It's very rare to have an intro to a video game that can knock your socks off as much as this, but Breath of the Wild succeeded in literally every way imaginable. For such a massive game, there is so much to learn about the world and the controls and the mechanics and everything. But rather than have the game teach you it directly, it provides you with all the tools and the open environment to teach yourself. Through triumphs and failures, you'll understand the basics of battling wide ranges of enemies, understanding its puzzles through shrines and Koroks, using the environment to get the upper edge, and hell, it may even get the upper edge on you from time to time. But that's all part of the learning process. It successfully teaches you so many things about the game while still only scratching the surface, as the scope of this intro really prepares you for the large scope of the world that's soon to be explored.
And the important thing is, the game builds so much desire for you to really pick this place apart by throwing you out into it almost immediately after you start the game. The lack of story and dialogue makes you want to search for a purpose in the world, that everything you do leads up to that next bit of story or lore, and it all actually feels worth it. And frankly, there hasn't been as much desire to really fall in love with the intro since the very first 3D Zelda game, which is where things come full circle. Although Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild are two completely different games, the cohesion of both of their intros did a perfect job at setting up the entire rest of their adventures. Ocarina's intriguing, dark story expositions did a great job on setting up the classic story to this game and foreshadows all the future events, while providing both overworld and dungeon-esque gameplay to teach the player all in a short manner. And Breath of the Wild's was more vague and open-ended, making the player's possibilities feel truly limitless.
With all this in mind though, it's unquestionable that these two intros are by far the best, but how exactly would we rank the others amongst them? Well, although most of the other intros just felt mediocre in our eyes, the only one that truly stuck out as weak to us was Twilight Princess, as not only was the gameplay in this section the most subpar, there was almost no story significance or driving motivation to complete it. At least the other three games had a more healthy mixture of strong elements thrown in, which is why I would rank them in the mid tier on this list. But out of curiosity, what are your guys' opinions on this list? Feel free to let us know your exact rankings on these intros down in the description below. But with all that said though, thank you all so much for watching this analysis on the intros to the 3D Zelda games. A massive thank you to MaskedNintendoBandit for joining me on this one. There's actually a second half to this video on his channel where we talk about and rank the top 10 title themes across the series, so I highly recommend that you hop on over and check it out. A link to that will be in the description, and feel free to show him some love too, as he's getting mighty close to the big 100k. But with that said, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed, feel free to slap a like on this video and subscribe here so you won't miss any future videos to come. Also, a huge shout out to my amazing patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you would like to help me out here for as little as $1 a month, all the info can be found in the description below. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.